financial goal.
You want more money? Turn what you know into dough. Start hanging out with the people who have it. You create wealth on your own terms. It is not only your right, but your duty to build wealth.
You are fiscally fabulous.
It's time to enjoy your legacy.
You're listening to Fiscally Fabulous with Dr. Teresa R. Martin, Esquire, a podcast that aims to provide you with the tools, guidance, and encouragement you need to build your wealth, enjoy your wealth, and leave a lasting legacy. Dr. Martin is an accomplished attorney, speaker, business consultant, and real estate strategist, an all-around self-made success who provides highly sought-after expert consulting in the creation, growth, and maintenance of generational wealth.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of Dr. Teresa R. Martin, Esquire, my name is Chrissy Bartles, and you're listening to Fiscally Fabulous. Does the idea of maximizing profits by investing in rental property appeal to you? If so, let me ask you this. Have you considered becoming a landlord? Real estate can be a great investment, but it can also be a poor investment. You can think of it like buying stock. Just as it's important you buy the right stock, you need to be sure to buy the right property. But it isn't enough to simply purchase the right property. There are other factors you need to take into consideration. You need to have the right tenant. You certainly don't want to be saddled with tenants who never seem to pay the rent on time, let alone at all, causing you to have to chase them down. You need reliable tenants who will pay on time. And of course, the numbers have to work. Remember, you'll have overhead costs to contend with, taxes, repairs, and so on. You want to make sure your investment in this property leads to a profit. So it's crucial you've got the financing in place to begin with to cover these and other unforeseen costs. In this episode, we'll look at the most important factors to consider when choosing your rental property, finding the right tenant, and a financial plan that works so that you have the best possible chance to maximize your profits. So let's begin with choosing the right property. There are 5 factors you'll need to consider before you sign on that dotted line. 1. Location. The neighborhood where your property sits influences the cost of said property, the type of tenant you're likely to have, the vacancy rate, rent, and the likelihood that you'll experience any appreciation. If the area has a large student population, for example, you can expect you may struggle to find tenants during the summer months when classes are not in session and the students have traveled home for their summer break. You'll also want to be aware of and look into towns that discourage rental conversions by tacking on exorbitant permit fees. If excessive red tape puts a knot in your stomach, you might want to avoid investing in a property in these locations. Is crime an issue in the neighborhood? That's something that can have a serious negative impact on the value of property in the area. You know what they say, crime doesn't pay. And if you're a property owner in a crime-infested neighborhood, it certainly won't pay you. Quite the opposite. Should you invest in a property with a high crime rate, you risk losing money, not making it. 2. Property taxes. The challenge here is you won't necessarily be able to predict what your property taxes will be. They could be much higher or much lower than you expect. When you're exploring potential properties, you'll want to be sure to verify the property tax information. Knowing this will come in handy when you're looking to determine the financing you will need. While you may not be able to know your exact property taxes, there are things you can do that will give you a better idea of what to expect. For instance, it's definitely worth a trip to the municipality's assessment office, which has all the tax information on file. You'll want to inquire about whether a property tax increase is likely in the near future. If it is, and you're given a pretty good indication of what that new tax rate could be, would you have the financing available to accommodate for this tax increase? Also, keep in mind, and this ties into our first tip about choosing the right location, if a town is in financial distress, it may raise taxes to a rate that forces you, the landlord, to charge an unrealistically high rent. If prospective tenants can't afford the rent, they'll just go somewhere else, and you'll be losing money. 3. Schools. If your property is located in better school districts, you'll attract tenants with children. Typically, rent in these areas tend to be higher, which could put you in a better position to increase your profit. Not only will having your property located in a neighborhood with good schools offer more chances of tenants willing to pay a higher rent, but should you go to sell the property in the future, being located near good schools will help increase its value. 4. Repairs. Let's say you've found what seems like that perfect property. The taxes on it are not too high, and it's located in a neighborhood with good schools, leading to tenants with children willing to pay that higher rent. But did you remember to really explore the property to see its true condition? Maybe there's a plumbing issue to contend with. What about the quality of the roof? Did you check its condition for any leaks and other problems? What about the condition of the building's furnace or AC unit? How long will these last before they need to be repaired? Then there are other repairs of a more cosmetic nature to consider. For instance, each time you have a new tenant move in, you'll need to make sure to have the carpets cleaned and the interior repainted. And these are just a few of the most common repairs you're likely to encounter. There's sure to be unexpected repairs that creep up ever so often, so you'll want to have a budget in place that can handle this. 5. The cost and the rent. Perhaps nothing is more important when selecting a rental property to invest in than the cost of the property itself and the amount of rent you can expect to collect. If these numbers don't work out to placing you in the middle of a sound, solid investment with a strong potential for profit, then you may as well be jumping onto an already sinking ship. Okay, but moving forward, let's say you've found that perfect property. Great location, the building's in good condition, so upfront repair costs are minimal. You've signed on that dotted line, you've spruced it up, and you're ready for your tenants to move in. But you don't want just anyone from off the street to take up residence here. Remember, you have costs to contend with in order to keep that place running. So it's to your benefit that the tenants you accept are responsible and reliable. So what should you consider to help find the right tenant? I recommend you focus on the following 3 points. 1. The job. What does your potential tenant do for a living? Start by checking their employment history. This information can tell you a lot about them. For one, the type of job or jobs they've had could be an indicator of their income. You might notice she changes jobs every 6 months. Could this mean there will be times when her rent payments will be late because of changes in her income? Or maybe he's completely without a job for an extended period. Does this mean there may be months here and there where he simply doesn't pay rent? In that case, you may be forced to issue an eviction notice. Now, instead of having budgeted to repaint the interior 6 months from now, when the tenant was originally supposed to move out, you suddenly have to factor in these costs unexpectedly. 2. Credit history. Just as a tenant's employment history can tell you a lot about them, a credit history can be just as valuable in that regard. If a prospective tenant's credit report indicates they've done a poor job paying rent in the past, there's a good chance this will continue to be the case in the future. This is where you, as the landlord and property owner, need to ask yourself, how much risk am I willing to take on, if any, when it comes to selecting my tenants? 3. The interview. I think it's fair to say that most of us have a pretty good sense about whether someone is a good person or not when we interact with them. But while your intuition may be strong, it is by no means foolproof. When talking to a potential renter, take a mental note of whether or not you feel a sense of trustworthiness from them. Use your intuition in conjunction with information about the tenant's background to make an informed decision. Do they seem to have their life together? You may find it helps to ask yourself after each interview, do I believe this person will pay me on time for the next year? And here's one important fact to consider. Some states make it extremely difficult to evict people. So choose your renters wisely. Let's take a quick break. Have you been struggling to close your deals? Maybe you're ready to make a change and truly create wealth for yourself and your family. But real estate seems too intimidating and overwhelming. The Real Estate Investors Association NYC, REIA NYC, helps experienced and aspiring investors and professionals understand the importance of legislation, funding, and education in the real estate businesses. We'll teach you where to invest. We'll teach you how to identify a good purchase. We'll give you a checklist. We'll teach you how to invest by the numbers. We'll help you build a real team. Subscribe to the REIA NYC community today. Visit reianyc.org to learn more and subscribe. Getting back to our tips. Take the story Kilvin Ross shares about his own experience in rental property investment, featured on thefyway.com. His story offers a word of caution to would-be landlords and a prime example of why it's so important to approve your prospective tenants with great care. On the issue of tenants, he writes, choosing the right tenants was very difficult for me. I had no idea how valuable screening each candidate was and basically went off gut decisions. I never ran background checks, but did validate references and employment history. My choice of tenants were a large contributor to not being cash flow positive. Another oversight was the eviction laws in the state and how they were largely skewed against the landlord. And here he tells us about a nightmare scenario with one of his first tenants. Professional welder by trade and made decent income, but had a terrible habit. There would be nearly 3 trash bags full of beer cans every week. He was able to buy beer, no problem, but neglected to pay his rent for many months. By the time I was done with the eviction process, he owed us over $3,000 in back rent. When he finally vacated the premises, I was relieved until I saw the condition of the unit. All of the closets were filled to capacity with trash bags full of empty beer cans. The stench was unbearable. He also nailed empty 30-pack boxes of his choice of beer to the walls. They were floor to ceiling like some sort of mural shrine to Anheuser-Busch. After many court appearances, the judge finally awarded us a money judgment. The alcoholic never showed up despite being summoned multiple times. Luckily, I knew where he worked and hired an attorney to apply for wage garnishments. I could recoup the $3,000 he owed, but at the cost of legal fees. Most of the money was recovered, but this was a very unpleasant first experience. So, What can we learn from this story? Well, Kilvin's first mistake with regard to selecting his tenants was to rely solely on his gut. His next mistake was not to run any background or credit checks on these individuals. He also failed to research the town and general area. If he had done so, he might have discovered that the local laws heavily favor the tenant when it comes to evictions. By not doing so, he set himself up for the horror story that was to come and no doubt consume his life at that time. Now, stories like these are not intended to dissuade you from ever becoming a landlord. After all, stories of people just like you becoming successful landlords happen all the time. But stories like these should highlight the importance of proper planning and research before diving headfirst into something that may be new to you. Disasters, like the one Kilvin experienced, do not have to be your experience too. All right, you've chosen the right property. You've met with and have begun the process of approving those potential first-time tenants to your new property. Now it's time to talk numbers. As you start on this journey of becoming a landlord, you want to make sure your financial picture is in order and is suited for the type of property you are renting out, and any costs you may incur, both seen and unforeseen. So, what are some ways to know that your financial situation is on the up and up before diving too deep into this investment? Well, there are two principal components. First, you need to know how much rent you should charge. It's important to get this right. If you set the rent too low, you may find you end up struggling at times to cover unexpected maintenance costs. These can put a heavy financial burden on your shoulders, and if repairs go unattended for long periods of time due to lack of available funds, your tenants can become frustrated, perhaps even to the point of moving out. Now, not only do you have these added expenses, but you've lost one or more tenants, which means until you're able to fill those units with a new resident or business, you're losing money every month. Of course, on the flip side, set the rent too high, and you risk scaring off otherwise good tenants who will pay on time and take care of the property. This is why it's so important to know the condition and needs of the property and the neighborhood really well before making this kind of commitment. Again, you'll want to examine the property in detail to see if and when any prior damage has occurred, what was done to fix it, and whether this will continue to be a problem in the future. If something looks like it will be a reoccurring issue, it would be wise to factor this into the cost of maintaining the building. When you have a better sense of what costs to expect up front and over the long term, you can use this information to charge a rent that will allow you to maintain the building's standards, keeping it up to code, and still make a profit. And the same can be said about the location. While a neighborhood comprised mostly of families and good schools may provide an environment where your tenants can afford a higher rent, if the neighborhood has mostly, let's say, university students, it's a safe bet that they won't be able or willing to pay a very high rent. So, given where your property is located, who is more likely to be your tenant? A family with children and a healthy bank account? Students on a tight budget and low-paying work, if any? Or an elderly couple or retiree living on Social Security and a pension? Knowing your community in advance will make it much easier for you to decide how much rent you need to charge per month. You've heard me mention costs a number of times here, mostly related to repairs and rent and so on. But there are other costs you need to consider when structuring your finances for this investment, beyond the cost of the property itself. Some of the costs you will incur will be things that can reduce your taxable income. depreciation, insurance, those annoying repair costs, interest. If you have a home office and your travel to and from the property are just a few examples of this. So remember, if you have aspirations to be a landlord and earn a healthy, passive income stream from renting out your property, then I strongly encourage you to follow these tips we've outlined here. Take the time to choose the property wisely, understanding the importance of location. Select your tenants with care, keeping in mind that you need to trust them to pay you on time. And finally, make sure the numbers add up and are a match for the financing you've put in place to make this happen. You certainly don't want to structure your financing to afford and maintain what you expect to be a $100,000 investment purchase when, if you had done your homework, you would have discovered it would end up being more along the lines of a $200,000 investment. As you can see, there are many factors to consider before making the leap to become landlord. Be sure to educate yourself fully prior to purchasing your first rental property. So plan this investment carefully. Remember, the goal here is not to see who can acquire and rent out a property the fastest. Your goal should be to turn a profit. And sometimes, reaching that goal requires hard work, patience, careful planning, and a bit of determination. But once you've achieved this, once you've successfully purchased and rented out your property and are seeing those profits start rolling in, you'll be the proud lord of the manor and you'll feel fiscally fabulous. Thank you for listening, everyone. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast or visit us at www.enjoyyourlegacy.com/fiscally fabulous podcast to learn more. On behalf of Dr. Teresa R. Martin, Esquire, I'm Chrissy Bartles, reminding you to enjoy your legacy because you are fiscally fabulous.
This has been Fiscally Fabulous with Dr. Teresa R. Martin, Esquire. If you would like to learn more on how you can build generational wealth and leave a lasting legacy, go to www.enjoyyourlegacy.com and be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening. Until next time.